From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
How low can it go? Not a question Kansans want to ask about the wheat crop, but one that may be in play as the ongoing drought kills plant after plant. Plus, one school district's solution to the teacher shortage leaves some parents in tears, others promising to move. And Kansas Democratic governor hands down another string of vetoes of Republican legislation, but avoids calling a special session on school funding. What's that mean for you? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. This week, the governor signed the K-12 school budget bill into law, but only after vetoing one part several rural school districts said would drastically cut their funds. As Jackson Overstreet shows us, one district said the move would have been the nail in the coffin that forced it to close.
It's the end of the year for the Fowler School District in southwest Kansas. And while it was a fun day for the students in its K-6 classes, it was a stressful one for administrators.
I think that public schools have always been under the microscope with the state legislature.
Superintendent Jamie Weddick says the school has been dropping in enrollment over the last 7 years. So much so the district has an agreement with nearby Meade. It helps run the 7 through 12 classes, and Fowler teaches its K-6.
We want this to be a community elementary school K-6, and that includes being merged with Meade. Whether it's a long-term agreement, a consolidation, or a transfer of territory.
That plan was in jeopardy. As part of the K-12 education funding bill passed in the State House this year, there was a change in what enrollment could be used for funding. Before, districts could use their enrollment numbers from 2 years ago. The bill that passed changed it, allowing districts to only use last year's or this year's numbers. And because of the declining enrollment at Fowler, it would have cost that district around $500,000.
Can we financially keep the building open with a merger with Meade? And is it going to benefit Meade? Or do they have to now pay to keep the building open?
Thursday, Governor Laura Kelly signed the bill into law, but vetoed the change in enrollment funding. It's a relief for Weddick, but he says the change shows what he thinks is the legislature not supporting rural schools like it should.
When you close a school in a small and rural community, you don't just close the school building, but you're closing that town down as well.
Well, the governor has issued several other vetoes in the last week, including SB 8, an $80 million tax reform bill she said was unacceptably packed with special interest tax breaks championed by big business. HB 2285, which would have blocked child COVID-19 vaccination requirements at any point in the future and stripped authority from public health officials. Republicans are vowing to bring that bill back next year. And a line item veto of a state budget proviso allocating $250,000 for the Quindaro Ruins Archaeological Park in Kansas City. Allies and critics alike have said that veto looks like political punishment for a freshman lawmaker who broke ranks with Democrats and voted with Republicans on several key issues, including becoming the deciding factor in overriding Kelly's veto of a transgender athlete ban for K-12 schools and colleges. Here to take a look at what all these vetoes mean for you, we have State Representative Ford Carr, a Democrat from Wichita, here in the studio with me. And joining us by Zoom, we have State Senator and Senate Vice President Rick Wilborn from McPherson, a Republican. Thank you both so much. And Rick, since I've got you up there, I'm going to start with you. There were a lot of questions about this bill. Education advocates, almost as soon as it passed, asking for a veto on it, especially because of this section as well as a couple of others. A lot of them said, though, that they wondered if lawmakers even realized this specific section was in that bill and if that would have changed votes if they had known. Did you know about it?
That's a very good question. I happened to be presiding in the Senate when the Senate Education Committee chairman was carrying the bill on the floor. And she did address the change in the count towards students. I don't think most of us recognize the impact. And obviously, I'm very sympathetic to rural districts because I have 13 rural districts in Senate District number 35, and about 10 of those have declining or slightly declining population. So I appreciate that and very sympathetic. However, the question isn't the question. The question is whether it's constitutional for the governor to be able to line item veto a policy item versus an appropriations item. And the Constitution gives her the authority, any governor, the authority to veto appropriation issues. But this was a policy issue, and I think it'll be challenged or looked at very closely by the Attorney General, and we'll move forward as we go along.
So you're concerned about the constitutionality of it. If the Attorney General rules that it is unconstitutional, would you say that the governor then would have a second chance to go back and veto the entire thing if she wanted to? Or do you feel that if it's ruled unconstitutional, the entire thing would become law automatically?
I think if her line, I'm guessing. I don't know what the Attorney General, how he's going to rule. We're just speculating. The question you asked is fair, but I think it would be unfair of me to make a guess on how that would come about. The AG can't force the governor to do anything. He would just make a ruling, and then it would be up to him or somebody to pull the trigger and challenge it in the courts.
And Ford, what are your thoughts on the constitutionality of this line item veto?
So, keeping in mind that I'm the freshman here and certainly haven't been in this legislature nearly as long as my colleague, the senator. However, I will say this, with respect to our adjournment into sine die. Again, having only gone through this, now one time, I was slightly puzzled, knowing that the governor had an opportunity to veto. I was slightly puzzled why we went into sine die, and therefore that wouldn't leave any opportunity in the event of a veto for this particular line item or any other for us to come back and revisit that. So I've got questions, with respect to the procedure there, because those are things that I just don't know. However, foundationally, vetoing that particular line item, I would have agreed with and supported the governor's veto.
Yeah, and the impact on rural schools, you and I were talking earlier about how the legislature doesn't really seem to pay as much attention to rural schools anymore.
I would agree. I'm a product of a public education, so I'm an advocate for public education. And those schools, as we saw here in the Wichita area, when you create a period of time where schools are underfunded, it's so difficult to run the race from the back. So with respect to what those new changes could have potentially done to those rural areas that again are so frequently left out, in my opinion, as are the underserved communities, here within the city. Oftentimes we are just opposite sides of the same street, so to speak. So again, we overlook those rural areas, and I don't think that's right. And again, for that reason, I would have supported that the veto by the governor.
Yeah. I also wanted to take a quick look at HB 2285, the tax reform bill. It included provisions that the governor said were special interest, big business. One of them in particular was about competition of city and county-owned businesses with private businesses, specifically gyms and daycares, that was heavily promoted by Wichita-based Genesis clubs.
Yeah, that one was a little difficult for me to get my arms wrapped around with respect to just the overall distribution of those tax funds. We had these big businesses. Those people that or those businesses that could probably afford to pay some additional tax, certainly more than those people on the lower spectrum of the economic scale. So I had a very difficult time, again, even understanding how it got there, right? Again, this being just a freshman term, a lot of these things, are new, and some things didn't make sense to me just, just on a normal level, and that was one of them. Yeah. It just simply didn't make sense to me at all that we would allow all of those extensive, the lion's share of the money went to the wealthiest of those involved, and again, to me, that just didn't seem fair at all.
Rick, you've been in the legislature for a lot longer. Do you have an explanation for Ford? A lot of folks I spoke with also questioning how specifically the Genesis tax cut seemed to get in there.
Well, first of all, even the governor admitted there was a lot of good things in here. There was a lot of tax credits for telecommunications. There was tax credits in there to help with the massive fines that were being levied against rural ag communities. There was a lot of good points. The whole Genesis thing is mainly in some communities. Genesis has put up a facility only to be outdone by a local government building something like it across the street, namely Johnson County. And if the facility is already there, there's no harm. It was very well written, but the governor chose to pick on that particular issue. There was a number of other free market things in there, credits that were beneficial to all levels of income, and we'll be addressing these again next year. It's a tragic that she had to make that decision, but she did, and so we'll just move on. But yeah, there was a lot of good things in there.
Talking about moving on, in a special meeting Monday, the Hutchinson Public Schools USD 308 Board of Education voted to approve the combining of two elementary schools, Lincoln Elementary and McCandless Elementary. As KSN's Craig Andrus shows us, it was a move that left some parents in tears.
We've heard rumors, but you don't hope that they're going to be true.
On a vote with only one no, the remaining board members voting Monday to close Lincoln Elementary and move the students to McCandless Elementary, combining the two schools. Staff say this should save the district money and help with a district that has declining enrollment. Not an easy decision.
We just know we have more facilities than we have students, the same number of staff that we've always had with students. And so this just kind of moved that up. We would have been having this conversation a year from now, but the teacher shortage really allowed us to have that conversation this year, which is unfortunate.
Some parents who are now losing their neighborhood school say they held out hope more board members could vote to not combine the schools.
We were really hoping to have more no votes, but we'll take at least the one. As much as that didn't make a difference, we at least know somebody was on our side.
For parents, we asked what comes next.
Well, I have to go tell my kids, and it's the thought of, do we send our kids or do we now homeschool?
And Hutchinson, not the only district facing this issue of declining enrollment and a teacher shortage. Was there much conversation that you were aware of in the legislature this year of attacking the teacher shortage in any way?
Pilar, absolutely not. Specifically with the teachers. However, there's a labor shortage in the state for many positions, which this only highlights a larger issue, right? And that's the fact that this particular state and across the country, really, as you look at the numbers, for those specialized and professional positions, we just certainly don't have the numbers to fill them, which again, in my opinion, it only falls back to things like public education and the ease of college access. The only way that we can approach those teacher shortages is that we have to graduate those qualified to be teachers. And at this particular time, we're just not doing that at a rate that allows us to keep up with the demand.
Yeah, I've spoken with some of the schools, university level schools that are having that problem. And Rick, you have several smaller districts in your area. Are you hearing from other districts facing similar problems, similar quandaries?
Yes, Pilar, let me give a little background first. And Representative Carr made a good comment. As Vice President of the Senate, I have the opportunity to meet with Hospital Association, the corrections community, the Kansas Department of Transportation. The list goes on. And this professional level shortages is all across the board. I can't put my finger on why. I have two daughter-in-laws that are educators. My wife is a retired educator at secondary and college level. And again, this is just happening across the board. As it relates to the specific issue in Hutchinson, Kansas, when you have diminishing enrollments, and boy, I'm sympathetic with those neighborhood schools. It's a heartbreaker for those folks. But when the ratio gets down to where you have more staff than there is students in that area, there needs to be consolidation. We do the same thing when we redistrict the state of Kansas for after census, readjust the lines, readjust the state representatives districts, readjust Senate districts to accommodate the shift in population. And unfortunately, when that happens, there are some people that are affected by it. But as far as teacher shortage specifically, we have done a few things such as having reciprocity with neighboring states. We've made some adjustments as it relates to military personnel moving into Kansas and helping with their spouses get a teaching position. We've made different adjustments. Now, those adjustments are not going to be helpful overnight, and they'll be incremental in time. But the shortage is bigger than just teachers. It's all across the STEM level, science, engineering, medicine. It's broad-based, and it's going to take time to work that all out.
And Northeast Wichitans are frustrated and mad, not over a teacher shortage, but over a planned truck stop at 21st and I-135. As Case Jackson Overstreet shows us, they say the city didn't talk to them about what was going on or take their concerns into consideration.
Anger and frustration spilled out of Tuesday morning's Wichita City Council meeting over a vote to adjust the zoning of a planned Love's truck stop on the northwest side of 21st and I-135 to allow for assigned and RV parking.
I feel really deflated because we weren't allowed to speak and just the way the whole situation was handled.
Several people who live east of that intersection came to speak against the truck stop, but were told no. The city had held the public hearing on the issue in a previous planning commission meeting.
Anything that comes through the MAPC, which is a joint board with the county and with the city, that public hearing happens at their board, really handstied really by law.
The city says it sent out public notices to businesses and homes within 750 feet of the development. The problem, residents say, is that zone only touches a few homes in that area, and most of them are rented. So the notice went to the property owner and not the person living there.
Had they communicated properly, they probably would have got a bigger response in protest.
Some council members share the concerns over the city's communication process.
That notification process is not good. State law says 200 feet. We have an escalating notification area depending on development size. But I've continually said that we should be notifying 1,000 feet minimum.
While Tuesday's vote was on the additions to the truck stop, the original project did not have to go through city approval since the land is already zoned for industrial use from previous businesses that have been there. As for what's next, residents say they plan to fight it any way they can.
It really feels like a slow genocide of our neighborhood. Between the water pollution and now with truck stops, the air pollution.
I'm a native Wichitan. I'm asking all my native Wichitans, would you want Loves in your backyard? Would you?
And Ford, you said when I spoke with you about being on this episode that this is one of two issues that are really keeping you busy right now. What are you hearing? What are you doing?
So it's really kind of a complex issue that the core of it should have been addressed a long time ago. First, we have the communication issue, right? For our underserved communities, and certainly that that I represent in District 84, the communication is always very slow in arrival, insufficient, if at all. Normally, we'll find out things in that community well after it's already taken place. You know, as we've seen in the situation of the contamination site, which is just you know, several blocks from the particular area that the Loves is being built. I understand that the city ordinance provides for a specific number of feet for notices to be given. However, because we have the interstate that's right there, you know, most people, including myself, you know, I would take the interstate out of the equation. You know, we're looking at the neighborhood that's just on the other side of the interstate. I believe the number that I got were 10 notices that went out, and again, I believe the number that I got were 6 of those went to what would have been vacant houses. And again, the others, as the young lady stated in the interview, the other notices went to the property owners as opposed to those people that live there. And so you've got a combination of things, because you've got a community who is, or there's been a history of not being communicated with, their needs not being met, they're not being addressed, and most specifically that they haven't had an opportunity to be heard. And this was just, you know, the culmination of that, you know, happening yet again. That being said, as the mayor stated, the property had the proper zoning, and it was private property, so the property owner, you know, then has the right, obviously, to do whatever it is that they would like to do legally, you know, on their property. But again, to me, the onus is on, you know, the city as well as the state for our lack of communication when things like this take place. I don't know at this particular time, you know, what we can do to make this a win, you know, and to turn this around. Certainly, as the young lady stated, who wants a truck stop in their backyard?
Yeah.
You know, what it's going to do, the traffic is going to be, you know, horrendous. I know there was talk about, you know, how many jobs would be created there. I've since had an opportunity to speak with the mayor about this, and again, there's a bit of public information that's not there, because in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, how many people does it take to operate a gas station? You know, I don't see the impact on the community there with respect to jobs. But during that conversation, Mayor Whipple expressed to me that there were some other things that were going to be placed on that property, and not just the truck stop itself, which would bring some additional employment. But there again, that's a lack of communication. Had we communicated those things in the onset originally, then quite possibly the perception would be different at this point. And again, I'll have to speak to this item as well. That initial hearing was held on a date and a time where the legislation was in session. So even though the community would have had the opportunity to be there, their state legislators would not have been there to support them either. So it's just a communication issue, and we've got to work through that.
Wow. And Rick, very quickly on this one, there is a certain benefit to transparency and hearing out from folks who live in the area, even if it's not going to change the final answer.
That's right. I read the article that you posted and also read the Wichita Eagle, and I saw where the mayor was quoted as saying there was nothing he could do. I think it's not only a lack of communication, it's lack of leadership. Somebody should have been in charge and take control of that and start treating it as a very important issue. I'm sympathetic with the neighbors. I'm sympathetic with the community, but it was handled, obviously, from what I've read, both in the Wichita Eagle and the other articles, it was handled very poorly. We care about Wichita, the 35 Senate District, because we're all part of the I-35 corridor. Many of our employees in the greater area of McPherson drive to Wichita. Believe it or not, we have a number of people from Wichita drive to McPherson area to work at our industry. And I think it takes somebody with the leadership and the skills to move this forward. And it's quite obvious there was a lack of leadership.
We're going to leave that discussion there. Finally today, this year's Kansas winter wheat crop is expected to be one of the worst ever. The Kansas Wheat Tour is estimating 179 million bushels of wheat will be harvested in Kansas. That's 13 million bushels lower than the USDA predicted at the start of the month. KSN's Mally Jones takes a closer look at the impact the drought is having on Kansas wheat this year.
A dismal outlook across the state. On different routes from Manhattan to Colby, scouts saw a yield of almost 30 bushels per acre. That is 10 bushels less per acre than in 2022. They hoped to see better wheat in central and eastern Kansas, but that didn't happen. As they made their way west, wheat fields turned more brown, with worse freeze damage than they expected, particularly in Manhattan and Salina. Moisture is helping the soil for future crops.
So it's not going to increase yield dramatically, but it might improve the quality of that wheat. So that is one glimmer of hope that there is, but there's also a lot that can go wrong between now and harvest.
And Rick, we don't have a whole lot of time here, but pretty concerning news, especially when you consider the power that the ag industry has and the role it plays in the state's overall economy.
You said it just perfectly. Agriculture is a huge part of our Kansas economy. I wish I remembered the numbers right now, but it's at least a third. And obviously this implement dealers, seed dealers, local communities, or local schools, or local employment, it'll be a huge impact. I think I read where this will be the worst crop since 1963. Our total bushels will be almost half of what normally is. And it will have definitely an economic ripple effect. And it will play into, what we do in the future. We are funding the Rural Water Plan. The Rural Water Plan was a key component of the ag community, maintaining adequacy in the Ogalla Aquifer all the way out to the different water strata.
Rick, we are out of time. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you. That does it for us, folks. We hope you have a great week and stay safe.